Hello and welcome to another live presentation here on my channel, Luis Borrero, Visual Artist. For those of you that are joining once again, thank you for being here today. And for those of you that are just joining, thanks again for the visit. And please subscribe and share the content with your friends. Today I have a really exciting subject that I want to be sharing with you guys. And it's the idea of Pentimento and the influence of Titian. Now, for a lot of you probably that are not familiar with Titian or these terms, this is a fundamental, very important concept in painting. And it was developed by Titian during the late Renaissance. And today I'm going to be talking about the idea of Pentimento and some of the materials and innovations that Titian makes in his paintings and how it has influenced artists throughout the history of art. So, all right, so let's just go ahead and begin. I want to be sharing some images and some amazing books that I have in my collection. And again, a lot of the books that I mentioned here, and for those of you that are just joining, the channel is essentially it's a place of study that I've dedicated to the investigation of painting techniques, materials, working methods for artists. So, and that's one of my interests. It has been my interest for years, and I'm excited to share the information. For those of you that do not know me, here in the channel you could find other videos that are dedicated to techniques essentially from the Renaissance all the way up to the 19th century. And week by week I just share some of the information that I've been gathering through the years with my research. And I love collecting these old books and essentially these wonderful journals on restoration. These are two wonderful publications. I believe they're publications from El Prado Museum, and they're analytical studies. This indeed is from Museo Nacional del Prado, and you could probably find these online. They're from the Ministerio de Educación Cultural of Spain. And I believe this one is from El Escorial, but indeed it is a publication from El Prado. Perhaps not, but these are studies and restorations that they have done on Titian's paintings, specifically in Spain. And during my travels, I have bought these catalogs, these amazing catalogs, and they have a lot of wonderful information on pigments and radiographs on some of the paintings that are housed in the national collections in Spain. And I absolutely love these paintings. This one in particular is from a portrait, Titian portrait in the Museo del Prado on Charles V on horseback. And it's a wonderful portrait that was very influential to a lot of artists of the late Renaissance and also the Baroque era and also beyond. And this one is from the Martyrdom of San Matthew, or from St. Lawrence, excuse me, in El Escorial, which is a wonderful altarpiece, very innovative, wonderful painting that Titian executes for Charles V. And he spent 3 years painting this painting, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful painting. So I'm going to be exploring and sharing some of the information that I've been gathering. But first I want to begin by talking a little bit about Titian and I will also be talking about materials later on, some innovations in terms of material that Titian makes in his paintings, and indeed are influential to another generation of artists such as Velazquez. So just to begin, for most painters, the idea of Pentimento and experienced painters, we today take the idea of Pentimento for granted. But for a lot of painters that do not know what Pentimento is, well, let me just begin by saying that the Pentimento essentially is the Italian word for arrepentir or changing your mind. So it's essentially painting, correcting while you're painting. And today, well, most artists work in that method. It's essentially the idea of modern painting. But during the late Renaissance and early Renaissance, artists were working mostly with commissions, and artists would not have that freedom. Most of the artists were working with on wooden panels. This is prior to working on canvas supports, and panels are they're much more difficult. It takes a lot of preparation. They have to be ordered from a master craftsman, and the surface will not hold as much paint. So therefore, the artists had to be a lot more organized, and the techniques, therefore, are different. And early on, Titian, by the time that he's 10 years old, he is trained in the studio of Giovanni Bellini, and I'm going to share some images with you guys of his early work. Titian is trained essentially just like any other Italian artist from the Renaissance and late Renaissance. He's working in a sort of very refined Flemish style. This is a painting, early painting from 1512, and this is a painting on panel. It's on wood. And this is just a straightforward technique from, it sort of resembles a Florentine technique, which essentially the artist is just preparing this canvas, this wooden support with gypsum and an animal glue ground known as gesso. In this case, calcium sulfate. And from there, once dried, the surface is scraped smooth or sanded smooth, and the drawing is usually prepared prior to beginning the painting stage. And this is an X-ray here of that painting indeed, and there you can see the underdrawing. And these are wonderful X-rays. I scoured through these books looking for the X-rays because they really do help me a lot in figuring out the genesis of the paintings. In this case, Titian transfers the drawing, and you could just see the reinforced dark lines here where the artist has gone ahead and transferred the drawing and then reinforced the drawing, perhaps with some fluid dark paint. Sometimes they use ink. And once you have the drawing fully figured out, then you could begin the process of applying the paint. This is the straightforward method of the early Renaissance artists. Leonardo da Vinci was working in this method, and also Raphael, even Michelangelo. It's a technique that has a relationship to fresco, where you have a wet plaster and then you transfer the cartoon and you reinforce the drawing in a sort of darkish red color. Well, this is essentially a similar technique, and Titian was just trained in this method. This is the standardized method that most artists were using during that time. So there's nothing really innovative in this painting essentially. But as time goes on, Titian develops a new innovative style, and this is yet another painting from his early period, and you can see it has a relationship to even Florentine painting, where it's just very refined, sort of a sharp edge, bright colors, just pretty straightforward technique for Renaissance artists. So as time goes by, Titian, during the time that he's in the studio of Giovanni Bellini, enters in contact with Giorgione. Now, Giorgione is an artist that begins to create a new style. Now, there's a debate whether Titian began this style or Giorgione begins this new style, but what is true is that they both shared studios, they worked on projects together, they were studio mates, and they worked on a series of commissions for the Taddeo de Tedeschi, which is the German market. I believe it's it's a business firm for the German merchants in Venice, and they begin this project together, and there Titian begins to change his style, and it begins to be more influenced by Giorgione. Now, what are the innovations that Titian makes? And that's what I want to get at. By the time that he paints this beautiful portrait for Charles V, he is working on canvas support. Now, canvas support was not very popular during the early Renaissance, but by the time that Titian is working, artists began to use linen. In this case, this is a piece of hemp linen, and the hemp linen is used by Velazquez and many other artists. It's a rough weave linen, and when you prime this with, first you would stretch this over, just a stretcher bar, and it was customary for Titian to apply a size made out of rabbit skin glue or any sort of animal glue. And then on top of that, they would add, it could be a calcium carbonate, okay, mixed with the animal glue, or calcium sulfate. And this would create a natural gesso. Now, this sort of priming is not, it's more successful on wood. So artists had to innovate ways to make it work on canvas. And one of the defects of the calcium sulfate with animal glue is that it's just not very flexible. So once you apply it in a very, very thick application, it could crack. So artists began to water down the gesso and apply it and work it into the weave of the canvas. So it would be applied with a knife or with a brush initially, and then work into the weave with a knife, and it would just be sort of like a whitewash gesso over this canvas. And after this was dry, they would pumice or sand the fabric down, and from there they would put an imprimatura. And the resulting surface would be something similar to this. I mean, this is just a piece of board that I've prepared, but essentially you have a gesso underlayer and then a very transparent imprimatura. And Titian begins using a variety of imprimaturas, from a very warm orangey imprimatura, which is what he used in the Martyrdom of St. Lawrence, and also in this portrait of Charles V. So artists began to use this sort of isolating. This is a layer that is rich in oil, and there's evidence that this layer would sort of soak up the extra oil from the imprimatura, and it would seal the layer. And on top of that, they would start developing a very quick underdrawing or very quick schematic drawing. And from there, they would build up the painting. Now, I have some x-rays to show you. Let's see. Let's look at some of the x-rays. So here you begin to see how Titian, in this beautiful x-rays, and these, again, these books are amazing because they have the actual painting, which I want to share with you guys. This is the actual painting right here, okay? And so you could, see how this painting is fully finished, and then once they x-ray this painting, there you could see how Titian is essentially making changes right there and then. So here you could just see how he perhaps started this portrait in the wrong position, and he just immediately corrects it and paints right over that, right next to it. There's some changes in the arm, and I have a close-up of that. And there you could see the original head was begun right here, okay? And he's quickly, without much hesitation, ready to just change it. and this is essentially called a pentimento or pentimenti in plural. So it's essentially a series of corrections that happen right directly on the canvas. Now this is very, very important to the development of painting, because artists began to work with a very free manner that the Italians call la gran manera, meaning just very, very wonderful drawing skill, and very free, very expressive brushwork. And you see those developments early on. Titian is really the pioneer of those developments. And here you see a close-up of this painting, and you see where Titian is, if you compare this painting to a Northern Renaissance painting, this sort of use of impasto is not apparent, and you don't really see this use of secco. And when I say secco, this is an important word when referring to painting, because quite literally the paint is being used in a very dry manner, and it's dragged across the surface. So by using brushes that are, well, as one of Titian's contemporaries describes, Titian used brushes that resemble brooms. And indeed, this is a fresco brush, and you see how this brush sort of looks like a broom. And by just having different sizes, you can see how probably the brush was very well loaded with paint, and Titian just is dragging, using the flat of the brush to drag and letting it perhaps dry, and then just applying more color on top, letting it dry. Now they have found there's a great chart in this book that I want to share with you guys. This is the sort of information that I just enjoy. Well, let's see, maybe it's in this one. Some amazing charts, and they tell you how many layers they find in each painting. Let's see if they have those charts here. Here you see the cross sections of what the type of pigments that they find. Also, how big, how well ground the pigments are or not. In this case, you can see that Titian was not grinding the pigments very finely. I mean, some of them are really ground very finely, but other ones are not. And that has fundamental implications for the handling of the material. So, but there's a chart here that let's see if I could find it. It had essentially a breakdown of how many layers Titian is using in each painting. So let's see if I could find it. All right, there it is. So here in the Martyrdom of St. Lawrence, which I'm going to show you in 2 minutes, he's using 5 to 8 layers of paint. In John the Baptist, he's using 5 to 11 layers of paint. In the Last Supper at l'Escorial, he's using 5 to 13 layers of paint. And this is something that you don't see in painters from the north. Painters from the north, usually you see 1 to 2 layers, perhaps 3, but you never see 13 layers. And that sort of shows you, indeed, the working methods of an artist that was just sort of overpainting and correcting. And Pacheco, which I've mentioned here before, Velasquez teacher, mentions this. He says, he goes on to describe Titian's working method, and he describes just how Titian is just layering, retouching, as he mentions, many times to get that perfect image. So very innovative, and by just applying one layer of either thick paint or veiled paint, which is called a velatura, you get a very complex optical mixture of the colors. And that's an important development. Now, there's some visual differences in this type of development. When you look at these paintings from up close, they sort of look unfinished, and Now, Pacheco is very critical, specifically of El Greco, who was a follower of Titian and also a student of Titian, and he calls it crueles borrones, which means cruel stains, essentially. But as you get further away from the image, from the painting, these forms come together, and that's really essentially the development. That is the innovation in the technique. I mean, a lot of these altar pieces were hung in churches that were very large. These images were, these paintings were hung high up, so artists had to work in a very loose style, so the forms had projection. So, and you see that in Velasquez as well. And I want to show you, let's see, some close-ups of this painting. Now, this painting was recently restored, and this is the technical journal of that restoration. And here you can see before it was clean, and this is the restored image. And here you can see how Titian is essentially using very pasty paint, and he's just dragging the paint all over to sort of bring out the light. And he's pushing the darks, perhaps with a very sort of liquidy paint, more transparent, and then the lights are painted by dragging essentially the brush with very dry paint. Okay, and this is a technique that has been lost now. Most artists today, as a matter of fact, I see a lot of artists transferring the drawing, and this idea of very schematic, very quick sort of Spaniards calls it realce, which is you're just sort of bringing out the lights and dragging the lights, or arrastrado, which is dragging the lights. This technique has been lost. A lot of artists do not use. They prefer one layer of paint or two layers of paint, and they model the, they mix all the tones, and they model the paint, and then they model the paint into a three-dimensional object. Now this is sort of just layers and layers, and the drawing is corrected as you go along. So I have here some more radiographs, and in this one in particular, you see where even there's a ghostly image of the arm still. Now, what happens with paint as it gets older is that it gets more transparent, and you begin to see the pentimento or the pentimenti, and that's true of Velasquez as well. Here you see how Titian just changed the arm in one position to the other, okay? And this is, when you look at these radiographs, let's see if I could show you some other radiographs here. It's very telling of an artist that is, very much interested in perfecting that image, and also it has a relationship to movement. The painting, here's a close-up. You see there how he's just using the white to just pick out the details and just drag that paint over sort of a dark. He's building the color, so the painting sort of acquires a little bit of a skin, and a texture, a sort of a three-dimensional. It's almost like sculpting with paint. And Titian was very influential to the next generation of artists, especially in the Baroque. He was influential to Rubens. He was influential to Velasquez. Velasquez, as a matter of fact, travels to Italy to study Titian, and also a lot of other Venetian painters, such as Tintoretto as well. And this technique, even today, artists such as Ansel Kiefer, more contemporary artists, even abstract artists, use this technique of just sort of putting layers on top of layers and creating what the Venetians call the blanket of color or optical color. It's a very effective method because you're actually creating actual space by juxtaposition, putting one color on top of another. So it's very effective. Now, let's just go ahead and take a look at Velasquez and how Velasquez used this wonderful technique. And I want to show you a painting that I love. It's a painting of Mars. And I want to show you the painting first. Okay, this is the painting right here. Okay, and even in some areas you could see where the paint has just gotten more transparent. There you can see where he made a correction. Okay, and also right here by the arm. Okay, there's a change in tone right there, and here you can see a darker color underneath. So, and the reason is because Velazquez is just correcting the drawing right there and then. He most likely worked with a very, very quick schematic drawing, as he usually did. And this is the X-ray to prove that theory right there. Okay, there you can see where he's making corrections. I mean, there's a lot of white lead here, which is the pigment that was being used by a lot of these old masters. And you see how he's probably, I mean, this was probably originally draped with just painted in a very sort of heavy style, and then he changes that leg quite a bit. So very, very important to study these radiographs, because they sort of teach you how the old masters were working in a very sort of loose style, great emphasis on drawing directly with the brush, and then just willing to change or make compositional changes to favor the end result, which is so important. And you know, I'm very much aware of that in my own work, and I love this method of painting because you get this very free sort of. I'm going to show you a close-up of that head by Velasquez. I mean, look at this. This is painted in a very free manner. Okay, the details are brought out by just hitting the lights, and just the helmet is essentially modeled by just bringing out the details of the gold armor here, just a little bit of white right there, and just some schematic details. And this painting is pretty large, and it would have been seen from a distance. So you're sort of seeing the visual. I would say the visual. It's almost like seen through a camera oscura. It's just the essential detail. Okay, and the Impressionists take this technique and they make it their own during the 19th century. And later on, a lot of other artists, such as Van Gogh, by using the impasto. So Titian is a very influential artist. His development of Pentimento is very influential to the history of art. So I want to talk briefly about now in terms of material, which I love talking about materials. I want to talk about two materials that are constantly being found in micrographs of the paint. Okay, so let's see. I have here two really important materials, and let's see how these materials behave. And I want to share this with you guys so you learn a little bit about the innovations that these artists were doing. Let's see. So I have two materials here that are really important. I have calcium carbonate, okay, and I have dolomite. And the calcium carbonate, is it's essentially chalk. In this case, it's just powdered marble, but there's also natural chalk. I use a natural chalk from Champagne. I get it from Kramer Pigments. It's wonderful. And a lot of painters, perhaps when seeing, let's see, I have a question from Javier Adams. Let's see, Javier, thank you for coming by. Oh, absolutely. Yes, yes, Rembrandt is very influenced by Titian. He is really an artist that is in line with the Venetian style. Rembrandt, Goya, which I'm gonna show here a Goya painting in a little bit, just to show you how Goya essentially uses the impasto, and they find these materials, the chalk, specifically the chalk, the dolomite they find in Titian's paintings, but the calcium carbonate they find all over in all over Rembrandt's paintings, especially his whites. Also, they find it in Velazquez. So it's a material that becomes in use during the Baroque era, and the reason is because it gives you that impasto quality. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just mix some calcium carbonate with just some paint that I've prepared. Now, these are handmade paints that I make on my own. I tube them, but just to show you what this is, a tube that has been separating for a while, and I want to show you the difference. When I take this paint out, you'll see that it's just very watery, and it's not very. Let me just get a close up there. It doesn't have much body to it, and I want to show you what just by adding just a little bit of calcium carbonate, what it does to the paint. So this is calcium carbonate. This one's from Kramer. It's calcite essentially, and I'm going to add just a little bit. And what the calcium carbonate does is it's an inert base. In Spanish, it's a carga. And it has the ability to sort of absorb the oil and lighten the color, make it a little bit more luminous without changing the color drastically. So as you're making paint, and if you add too much oil, you could add a little bit of calcium carbonate to correct. So you saw that that color is just very, very watery, and the paint has been separating. So by just adding a little bit of calcium carbonate, now I'm going to transform this color and make it more pasty, and I'm going to give it some body. So immediately you see how now the color has more body, and look how just the color has not been affected. It does make it more luminous, more clear. So there I regain the consistency of the paint, and this is very important when you're working. You know, if you're the calcium carbonate has a couple purposes. One of them is to control the transparency of the color. This is a red ochre, and it's usually very, very, very opaque. And I'm going to show you. I'm going to do a test here. And look how that just changed the character of that color. It made it a lot more pasty, okay? And now the color even stands up a little bit, okay? It's a lot thicker. And if I keep adding more calcium carbonate, I could essentially make it, let's see, just add a little bit more right there. And this color, I could make it almost like a transparent glazing color by just adding more calcium carbonate. So let's see. Look how pasty this color is getting by just making it thicker. Now I haven't changed the composition of the color at all, and I've added two benefits. By adding chalk, I'm controlling the amount of oil. The oil has the ability to darken the colors, so this will help me, you know, control the excess amount of oil. It will give me texture, and I have a bonus here. And the bonus is that I have transparency. Now I've made the color a lot more transparent. So here's the same color that I made earlier. The same color side by side. This has a lot of chalk added to it, and this has very little chalk. So let's see. Let's just go ahead and apply this. You start getting an undertone, and you see how it gives you a nice transparency, okay, over a white ground. So the chalk has the ability to make that color a lot more luminous and a lot more transparent. And this is wonderful for earths when you're working the shadow colors, if you don't want the colors to get too opaque, because part of the beauty of this technique is to let the colors show what's underneath, right? So, but in the case of lead white, when you mix and I have already prepared some samples here to save time. And these are samples with chalk already added to it. When you use, let's see here. I'm going to show you how this works. I want to do some impastos. I'm going to clean this brush. And the impastos, most of the impastos that you see in Titian and Velasquez. Now Velasquez is, he goes as far as creating sort of a medium with, you know, the chemical analysis always find an abundance of calcium carbonate in his shadow colors. And my theory is that he probably was just wanting the colors to be a lot more transparent, and he probably just mixed the calcium carbonate with just an oil and to make sort of a medium. Now, you're probably wondering how that works. Well, I'll do it right here. So you could see how that, for those of you that are just getting started with oil paint. Let's see. So this is a very clear oil. It has been somewhat thickened with sun, which is something that Pacheco mentions, and Pacheco was Velasquez's teacher. So how does this white or transparent sort of white color works? Well, I'm mixing chalk with just oil here, and now I'm going to make sort of a color, a white color out of the chalk. And you get this sort of gel medium that is really, really beautiful. And you see how it's just too much oil for now. So I'm just going to continue to. Now the Dolomite, you're probably wondering about the Dolomite. The Dolomite, it has a similar effect. It's a little bit more iridescent. It has this sort of iridescent quality. But there you see, just before your eyes, how I just made a very sort of transparent white with just calcium carbonate. Okay. This is almost like probably a precursor to zinc white, and I could make it probably even a little bit thicker. And when you use this color, you could now lighten for example, the other colors in a very, very subtle way. Look how it's very thick. So I could use this almost like a gel medium. Now, whether Velasquez used it this way or not, I can't tell you for sure. They do find it in abundance. And there you could see how, I mean, it doesn't take much mixing. It's essentially sort of a gel medium. And it has thiotropic qualities, which means that it gives you this sort of texture. And now if I take this and I just get a little bit of that red ochre, and look at what a beautiful light color that is. I mean, sustain the luminosity. I lighten the color, but it didn't become opaque like a white lead color. Okay, so when you apply it to the surface, you get this beautiful dragging effect, and look how much more transparent that is. So that's essentially the use of chalk. Now, in terms of the white color, the impastos, okay, I'm going to do one last demonstration here just to show you how these artists were using these sort of very simple materials to change the consistency of their paints. Okay, and this you could do with any chalk. You could buy it from Kramer Pigments, you could buy it from Natural Pigments, you could buy it from, even probably Dick Blick. So they sell it everywhere. So this white chalk, white lead, this is stack process lead white I make on my own. I'll be covering that in another life at some point. I mix it with a little bit of chalk, and you can see here by just mixing, look at just this dragging effect. This is essentially the kind of effect that these artists were trying to achieve, which is by using the flat of the brush and just dragging the side of the brush with a paint that is just very sort of sticky and has texture, you get this beautiful impasto effects. And this is what they call secco. Essentially, the surface is dry and the paint has chalk and it has a resistance to the surface, so it breaks and you create what they call the turbid medium effect, which is, it's dragging a light color over a dark surface. So these are very simple, innovative ways to change the consistency of the color. And look at the difference between the yellow ochre that has been mixed with the white chalk and the lesser amount. So you could actually make the colors more luminous with the chalk. It's essentially a transparent white. All right, so I hope that you have enjoyed this live presentation. Before I go, I want to tell you about my 2 new courses that I have out on Udemy. A lot of you that have been joining here, that have been supporting the channel, I see that you have joined the classes in Udemy, and thank you for your support. I just released a classical portrait drawing course. I'm really excited about that course. It was a lot of work to put together. I'm very proud of the material there. So visit the links below and check out the courses. They have a lot of information. This information is more related to painting, but there you could find very useful information in a similar matter in terms of drawing materials and techniques. I'm very analytical about the information that that I research and that I put out on the channel. So check it out. There's 2 discount codes that you could use to get a discount. And again, for those of you that are joining for the first time, subscribe to the channel. I'm here every 2 weeks doing the live presentations, and I vary the subjects from painting to drawing. So I'll be back in 2 weeks with more information on historical painting techniques. And for those of you that have not subscribed, subscribe and share the information. So again, thanks again for coming by, and I hope you've enjoyed the material. And if you have any questions, make sure to write them down, to write, and if you have questions about where to find the materials, I'm happy to share the sources. So all right, well, thanks again for coming by, and I'll be seeing you in 2 weeks' time. Have a great weekend. Thanks again. Enjoy.